Hello, everyone, and welcome to the i3 Summit by TimesBridge. As the largest open internet market and one that is amongst the world's fastest growing consumer markets globally, the Indian market is primed for unparalleled growth and opportunity this century. The world's eyes are on India, and global organizations are increasingly looking at the plethora of opportunities India provides, including the unmatched demographic dividend, the surging and aspirational middle class, over 800 million internet users, the growing preference for digital payments, and the rising purchasing power of Indian consumers. In the last few decades, India has shown that its economy is on a continuous upswing and is poised to become the world's third largest economy by 2030. To leverage this India opportunity for global category-leading organizations, TimesBridge was incepted almost a decade ago to ally with the world's most purposeful companies to enable their entry, scale, and impact across India. TimesBridge is the global investments and venture arm of the Times of India Group, India's oldest and largest media and digital company that places culture at the forefront of its partner company's approach to India immersion, growth, and scale. With a solid investment portfolio of 15 plus global category-leading companies such as Uber, Airbnb, Coursera, Headspace, and more, in its last decade of existence, TimesBridge has been credited with launching and scaling world-leading companies in the country. With this inaugural i3 Summit, TimesBridge is bringing together industry experts from the best global and Indian organizations to draw on the three-dimensional aspects of working, leading, and winning in India. Once again, I welcome all of you to this yearly gathering that will spark an insightful conversation on the complexity, challenges, and opportunities that India has in store today and for the next decade. For our first fireside chat, Winning in India, we will be joined by a globally reputed speaker who represents the world's largest on-demand mobility organization that has a deep, long-term commitment to the Indian market. Since its launch in the country in 2013, this company has continued to look at the market three-dimensionally, most importantly, as an innovative gateway to the developing world. Please join me in welcoming Dara Khosrowshahi, CEO of Uber, in conversation with Rishi Jaitley, founding CEO of TimesBridge.
Thank you for joining i3, Times Group's first annual summit, where we convene each year leaders from around the world and leaders from across India to talk about India and the India opportunity, and particularly those leaders who are thinking of India, as we put it, three-dimensionally, thinking about India not just as a source of audiences and customers, not just as a source of business and revenue, but a source of learning, a source of innovation, and a source of culture. And we're delighted to be joined today in our first annual i3 Summit with the global CEO of Uber, Dara. Welcome and thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, and delighted to be here virtually, of course.
Well, it was good to see you in India a couple of years ago, and I thought it'd be fun to chat a little bit about your journey with India personally, intellectually, certainly as an executive over the years, and of course, mostly as CEO of Uber. You know, with all things India, I enjoy sort of starting personally. Do you have a moment in time, whether it was at Uber or even before Uber, prior roles as an executive, even as an individual, where sort of India first became top of mind to you? It's always an interesting question I find asking CEOs and founders around the world.
The first time that I visited India personally was at Uber. It was less than a year into my joining Uber CEO, and the Indian market, you know, it's such a dynamic market. It's so full of possibilities that it became quite apparent to me that I had to go see the market on the ground to truly understand it. So that was the first time I visited India, and it was just an incredible experience for me personally as well as professionally. And for me to see firsthand how integral Uber has become to urban life in India, how much we've changed the mobility landscape fundamentally, and just as importantly, how we were offering economic opportunities to so many people my being on the ground and experiencing that personally and speaking to other leaders in India, politicians, et cetera, it just became so apparent. So I think, it's actually a two-way relationship. India is very important to Uber. And I think that Uber is also very important to India, and that comes with responsibility. And as a result of that visit, and also folks that we have on the ground, we've continued to expand our product offerings really for the Indian consumer, whether it's autos or motos or high capacity vehicles or rentals, et cetera. India has always been a very, very big part of the Uber journey. I think more recently, and just as importantly, it's on the talent front. I personally actually had a very strong experience when I was CEO at Expedia before I was at Uber. Expedia had a dev center in India that was growing very fast, that was quite successful. We had excellent talent there. So one of the other areas where we have really leaned into our Uber journey in India has been on the talent front, especially on the engineering side.
I think part of why we've been so excited and heartened to be a ground floor partner with Uber over the years is because you all have always, and you in particular, Dara, have had such a multi-metric, three-dimensional take on the market. And it's really inspired us. In some ways, I'd like to give you credit for this event because I think your frame on India has always been multi-pronged, where you're looking at many things concurrently, not just your centrality, as you noted, in sort of the transportation environment in India now, but also the role talent in Uber plays for Uber globally. That's fantastic. One of the things that we observe a lot, Dara, is that there's no shortage of sort of global storytelling and excitement about the Indian market. And so one of the things we navigate often is sort of expectation, right? When people are visiting India, when people are entering India versus how things play out in practice. How would you sort of frame up that for you? Obviously, it's a market with no shortage of zeros at the end of it across many metrics. But looking back on that visit and sort of the early months of your steering Uber's continued growth in the market, does anything come to mind around, I was expecting X, but it turned out to play out like Y? Just curious.
Well, I think for us, what has been consistent is that India has been an incredibly strategic market. Like you said, lots of zeros, huge population, young population, connected population, and ever more so. I think for me, has been really important in that the Indian consumer is extremely demanding, right? They're demanding in terms of price, they're demanding in terms of quality, and they're very much demanding in terms of service as well. And so you can look at that in one of two ways, which is, oh my God, there's going to be a hard market to get into, et cetera. Or the way that we look at the market then and the Indian consumer is that if we can make it in India to some extent, we can make it anywhere.
I love that.
And it really is true. Listen, we don't take it for granted. The Indian market is a difficult market to compete in. And it's a difficult market to succeed at scale. And if you're coming in with the attitude that we're a global company, and if our products work in the US and Europe and a couple of other countries where they're just going to work in India as well, you will get killed because the Indian consumer, because of the demanding nature of the Indian consumer, you really have to build locally for India. Obviously, there are benefits to being a global company and having a service in many, many countries. But if you try to be average in India, you're going to lose. And so our approach has always been to hone our product in India in an India first way. But then there's another advantage there, which is to some extent that honing of your product creates opportunities into other developing nations. To some extent, kind of India is a test ground for us to hone our local product because it's such a large market and such a large opportunity, but also because it's such a demanding market. And then some of the innovations that we build in India, we then take global, especially to other developing and emerging markets as well.
I love that. There's so much in there. One of the things that I've said personally, having spent 15, 16, 17 years helping global companies navigate India is, when I host folks in India, I don't say welcome to India, I say welcome to the world. Because in many ways, the Indian market is a microcosm of all the world's markets in one market. And again, I think you stumbled into an insight that we speak often about at TimesBridge. And I think you've also noted something that we see often in India as well. My favorite word for the market is coexist, meaning you have a lot of things, sometimes juxtaposition, sitting next to one another. On the one hand, Indian consumers have propensity for global companies and global brands, but are also very demanding and are looking for service. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to, I think Uber's just expanded into its 100th city in India. Extraordinary, and congratulations. Just sort of how you've thought about scale in the market. In the early years, obviously, there was a huge investment made in India's biggest metropolitan centers. In the last few years, it appears as though you've really taken great strides to have continental scale, if you will. Talk a little bit about those decisions and how you got there.
I think that there's a standard strategy for any local on the ground company, and we certainly are local and we certainly are on the ground, which is Uber has always started as a urban product, right? We have started in the larger cities of the world, and India has plenty of large cities, global large cities. And so in the early days, when we got into India, we tend to focus on the bigger cities out there, just like we do in other countries. What's different about India is that the next, call it, level of cities, whether it's 100 cities or 200 cities, 300 cities, these are significant cities in terms of population. Often there are significant local differences and habits in terms of the consumers. So we have just consistently been expanding our scope from, call it, the top tier cities, top 10 cities in India, into the next tier, because we feel the opportunity is great, and because we also think that it's a responsibility. If you think about Uber and how much of a part of people's lives we are in terms of providing mobility, but also providing earnings opportunities, we think that it's part of our responsibility to reinvest into the market. And we're certainly in for the long game in India, so that we can take, you can expect the larger markets are more profitable, and we can take those profits and essentially reinvest them into the next tier of cities. So we see a long, long road as it relates to India, quite literally, and expansion into additional cities and bringing Uber to a higher and higher percentage of drivers and households in India, wherever you happen to live.
One of the other things I say to folks when they visit India, sort of welcome to the future. I mean, the thing about India is sort of it's the past, present, and future sort of in one market as well. An ancient culture that also is sort of revealing to us what the future looks like. Some of our past conversations, you've talked about and framed India as a critical transportation innovation market for Uber. Can you give us a glimpse into what's coming down the pike and what you mean by transportation innovation more generally? Obviously, you're a leading position from a classic ride standpoint and classic vehicle standpoint, but love to kind of get some thinking and reflection from you on transportation innovation in India and what India has taught you on that front.
If you think about where Uber came from, we were essentially a ride-hailing company in the early days, right? Push a button and a car shows up. It's a delightful experience and a super important one in terms of everyday life. The way that we think about our transportation business now is much more of a transportation platform. Push a button in order to get from A to B, and we will offer you up multiple ways to get from point A to point B in a particular city where you live in. It's not just about car hailing. It's not just a taxi product, but it truly is an everyday transportation product. And so what we've been forced to do then is to innovate on mobility products for additional use cases. And India has been a real innovation hub for us as it relates to those kinds of the new products. So if you look at, for example, our rentals product, you can push a button and rent a car on Uber. That was a first that we introduced in India, and we have expanded across the world. We have a product in India. It's quite common to rent a car or hail a car to go from city to city. That's not a behavior that you see in the West. It's certainly not a behavior that you see in the US, but it is a common behavior that you see in India. So our intercity product, for example, is another example of a product that was uniquely Indian, and we're looking to expand around the world as well. We talked a little bit about getting into some of the smaller cities, our 100th city in India as well. That also forces innovation for us around affordability. We want our product to be affordable to the highest percentage of users in any country. And that has resulted in innovations such as autos and hailables as well. And again, those are innovations that we drove in India and now have expanded all over the world, because we do want to increase our affordability anywhere where we are, whether it's India or Brazil or Mexico or the UK as well. So India, it's a combination of the talent that we have on the ground. It's a combination of the market. It's a very, very fast moving competitive market. And it's also a large market. We've tended to look at some of these mobility innovations, test them out first in the Indian market. And again, if they work in market, then we can expand them all over the world.
Can you talk, one of the questions we get often from executives around the world as they're thinking about the Indian subcontinent is, the crass way to put it is sort of org chart questions and organizational questions around how to think about delegation, particularly on the product and engineering side, and how to really unleash innovation. Obviously, you guys have had a lot of success on the product side in India and the software side. I think you just recently announced an integration with WhatsApp, if I'm not mistaken, in the Indian market. Could you just talk a little bit about just organizational design and how you've thought about that, given that in India you're firing on many cylinders, not just go to market, but also creativity for the platform itself. Be curious to hear a reflection from you there.
One of the most important factors as it relates to our success in India is, if you want to make an India first product and a truly first-class product on the ground, you have to have teams on the ground. For us, we've always had a very strong culture, GMs, general managers, who are on the ground basically in most cities in which we operate, certainly in countries. And in India, we have had a very large ops team on the ground who is empowered. The GM of India is essentially a mini CEO and is thinking about all of the different ways in which the product comes together, and really has to bring together many teams, marketing teams, product teams, engineering teams, data science teams, and bring them all together to work as a team and really orchestrate all of the different efforts that are happening across the company locally, so that they work for the Indian consumer on the ground. So I think that GM type concept of having a very empowered leader on the ground is incredibly important. For us too, we're very much an innovation company, right? We're a technology first company. I'd say the most significant limiter of our growth going forward is actually how many engineers can we sign on and bring to build at Uber. And so for us, our building up our engineering hubs on the ground has also been incredibly important. We've got a hub in Bangalore. We've got a hub in Hyderabad. And we don't have those teams just work on global projects. We will hand them the leading position in terms of building products that then we want to expand globally. So one area we talked about in terms of affordability is high capacity vehicles, right? If we can get you in a car, can we get 10, 15, 20 people into a van and build it with the kind of Uber magic and Uber delight that we are known for? That product it's clearly a global product. It's not just an Indian product, but we have an Indian engineering product team on the ground building that product for India, but also exporting it all over the world. So we got 700 engineers in India. We're targeting to have over 1,000. And, these are engineers who are on the leading edge of mobility and transportation innovation as well. So I think you got to have those teams empowered on the ground in terms of the business owner and the business orchestrator and the captain of all these different areas of expertise coming together. And then if you want to be a leading innovator on the ground, you've got to have engineering teams that aren't a part of the team, but are actually leading product innovation from the ground up.
Fantastic. Just a couple more questions I'd love to ask you. First is sort of about how you think about the importance of Uber leaning into local cultures, if you will. At TimesBridge, one of the things, and Times Group more generally, in some ways we're in the culture business, right? Being in media and distribution. And one of the things we say at TimesBridge is our mission really is to help the world's most purposeful ideas find their way into the zeitgeist of India. Because if you can have kind of cultural currency in the market, in some ways you transcend any individual campaign or any individual growth initiative, right? You've arrived because you're in conversation, you're relevant, you're participating. I think one of the things you guys have done an extraordinary job of is finding relevance in culture around the world, but certainly in India with all your work with cricket in India, your work at the World Cup, Cricket World Cup, I think a couple of years ago, and certainly with individual cricketers in India. Just could you talk a little bit, maybe not even an India question, but just sort of philosophically how Uber generally tends to think about how it connects into the zeitgeist of all markets, but in particular India.
What's super interesting about Uber as a product is, we're building tech. The majority of folks who are at Uber are builders. But we're different from a bunch of other technology companies in that we're essentially building technology that is very much affecting the real world. We're not a digital only company. We are very much a digital innovator who is innovating around real world work, real world, and around logistics and around mobility of people and things in many of the markets in which we operate. That real world innovation has us touching lives in a much more fundamental way than just digitally, right? We have millions of earners earning on our platform and earning living on our platform in a flexible way so that they can be their own CEOs and they can work when they want, where they want, how they want. That's a very different way of touching someone than just touching someone within a digital ecosystem. People depend on us for transportation. If they need to get to the airport and they're depending on an Uber, that's a different responsibility than, let's say just getting your search results right. So as a result of that, we have had to, I was at Expedia before, travel company, et cetera. When I think about Uber and how local we have to be and how relevant we have to be in terms of daily life and how we have to tune our product and then our marketing and our communications, not just to customers, not just to earners, but to governments and the kinds of dialogue that we have to have in order to grow and grow responsibly. The kinds of dialogues that we have to have are much more local, are much more fundamental, and as a result, force us into the zeitgeist whether we want to be there or not. It's just how we do business. The other factor I would tell you that is also important, and it's important in India as well, as India is a big market. It has a very important ecosystem of companies there. So we've also looked to partner on the ground with the Indian business community as well. An example of that is a partnership we have with Bajaj Auto to support post-pandemic recovery of autos in India, or partnerships that we have with the electric vehicle ecosystem to get more EVs on the platform. We got more than 5,500 EVs on the platform as well, and we really have to accelerate that. So it's being on the ground every day, but also partnering with the ecosystem to make sure that your product is delivered in the right way and a responsible way.
Well, I think what's extraordinary to have, in terms of witnessing Uber's journey in India is, you're right that by design, Uber sort of occupies space in the zeitgeist, but you guys have taken that to another level, I think, with how intentional you've been with storytelling, with engagement across society, across the subcontinent, and it's obviously part of our mission, so it makes our day often. Well, last question, Dara. We talk to executives around the world. Many of the folks watching are CEOs, founders, investors, executives from many countries around the world who are contemplating in India and what role India might play in value creation for them. What advice would you have for executives? Just a few pieces of advice at a kind of generalized level for folks who are contemplating India market entry and or sort of value creation from India.
The first piece of advice that I would give to any executive looking to build or compete in India is you've got to play the long game, right? The market is enormous. The opportunity is huge. There are going to be many competitors in any segment of significance in India, and you've got to be willing to reinvest both in terms of capital and in terms of talent to build in India. This is a 10+ year kinds of bets that you have to make. And unless you're reinvesting aggressively, you're going to have competitors out there who are moving faster than you, building more aggressively than you. So you've got to think about India, big picture, long game. Second point I would make, I just referred to, is the Indian business ecosystem is huge. And so entering into that ecosystem and building out local partnerships is incredibly important on the business front, but is also incredibly important in the public sector as well, as it relates to government regulatory partnerships. And again, those partnerships and that trust takes time to develop, which goes back to my first piece of advice, which is you've got to be in the long game. And then the last point we talked about a bit as well, which is if you're going to win in India, you have to build a truly great product, which for us has translated into having innovation on the ground, and especially engineering and innovation on the ground. Having your own employees take pride in your product, and also pick your own products apart so that we can always build for best of breed, I think is a great formula for success. And it just so happens that the talent, and especially the technical talent in India, is great. So you're winning both ways.
So appreciated, Dara, and lots of insight there, particularly around public institutions. Public institutions are important in India, and we tell people all the time who are used to leaning in markets where you don't really have much interaction with public institutions. In India, you run towards them because there's so much positivity and value creation that can come from those kinds of collaborations. Well, Dara, thank you so much for your time and for joining TimesBridge's first annual i3 Summit. We've long admired Uber and yours commitment to and conviction around India. And as evidenced by this conversation, you're playing India across metrics, across dimensions, and to use your words, the long game as well. So thank you again, Dara, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was a delight.
There is so much to unpack from Uber's learnings in India, particularly the notion that if a global company can make it in India, they can make it anywhere. It's interesting how the global giant looks at India from a long-term perspective and looks at partnering with the ecosystem to make sure that a global idea is delivered in the right way and, equally importantly, a responsible way. For our second fireside chat, Leading in India, we will be joined by our next speaker, an Indian entrepreneur who built his company in India during the mid-90s. The company, InfoEdge, is now one of the most well-known internet companies in India, and its founder is a major investor in several successful startups, including Zomato and PolicyBazaar. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Sanjeev Bikhchandani, founder of InfoEdge, for a fireside chat with Viral Jani, EVP and Country Head India, TimesBridge.
Hello and welcome to the inaugural i3 Summit by TimesBridge. It's the first year that we are doing this, and we are super excited to launch this platform. It's the platform wherein we are trying to bring in the best of voices across the world and from India. And the idea is to get some of the most successful entrepreneurs and founders and CEOs to come and share their learnings about their journeys in general, and of course about India. On this inaugural session, we have a very special guest today. I'm delighted to welcome Mr. Sanjeev Bikhchandani, founder of InfoEdge India, also a veteran in the tech industry for India. So a very warm welcome to you, Sanjeev. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Great. So without further ado, I can quickly start with a round of questions from my side. So it'll be great to hear from you, Sanjeev. You started your journey way back in 90s. When most of the people are not even thinking about internet businesses, and we've seen you having being successful over the decades, so to say. It'll be great to hear from you. What are the key differences that you are observing from then till now? Like, how have internet businesses evolved, and are there any key differences or similarities that you see in the businesses?
Well, if I look back, I quit my job in 1990. Prior to that, I'd done my MBA. I'd worked for 5 years in 2 multinationals in advertising and marketing. I quit my job in 1990 and I became an entrepreneur. No big idea, no vision, no nothing. Just pursued a bunch of small things for the first 7 years. I was drifting, right? Doing a whole bunch of small things: salary surveys, databases, report writing, teaching, training, part-time journalism, whatever came my way to survive. In 97, we launched Naukri as the 21st small thing I was going to do. At that time, there were only 14,000 internet accounts in the country. There was no venture capital. There was no, startup culture. If you were an educated, qualified person, you wanted to do a job, you didn't want to be an entrepreneur. That was the environment then, right? I think between then and now, several things have changed. Let's look at the entrepreneurial ecosystem first. It is now desirable and even socially acceptable for highly educated, qualified people from the IITs and the IIMs to want to be entrepreneurs, right? And their parents are supportive, the family are supportive. It is socially acceptable, right? I remember in the 90s, if you quit your job in a large company and became an entrepreneur and you failed and you wanted to come back to your job, your career was over. You were doomed to a glass ceiling of middle management because entrepreneurial experience was not valued. You were called a failure. Right? And so you retreated and came back. Today, if somebody comes into a large company with 3 or 4 years of entrepreneurial experience, that experience is valued. You say, hey, he knows stuff. He's got a 360-degree view of the organization. He can take a risk. He can work across functions. Therefore, it will be prized. It will be valued, right? In most companies.
Yeah.
So that mindset has changed. Second is early stage risk capital is available in decent supply, enough amounts, right? So you can get your angel round, you can get your seed round, and some may not get the Series A, but enough will get Series A, enough will get Series B. Companies will grow and form, and we're seeing that in the kind of success stories we are seeing, right? So a much larger number of very smart people, highly qualified people trying to be entrepreneurs. In the 90s, the aspiration of those kind of people was to do a good job in a good company, right? I think socially acceptable. I think capital is available. I think there are role models. I think there are mentors. I think there are organizations like TIE. I think there are angel networks.
Yeah.
They're incubators in colleges and engineering colleges, management schools, even arts colleges have incubators now, right? Yeah. So it's a done thing, and it's regarded as important and useful. As far as the market is concerned, right? It's become much larger, especially for internet companies. Mm-hmm. Right? When we, like I said, when we started Naukri in 97, there were 14,000 internet accounts in the country with shared account users, maybe 100,000, 200,000 users.
Yeah.
When we raised venture capital in the year 2000, there were 4 million users.
Right.
Today, that number is up by 100 or 200x. Today, real businesses are earning real money online. Today, even FMCG companies, even old world companies are looking at online business for the mainstream business. So I think digitalization is real. I think online businesses are real. I think offline companies are going online and making that a part of their strategy. So I think many things have changed. So there's been a complete transformation. But it's not been one day. It's been gradual over the years, year after year. Things have changed.
That's super interesting. I mean, it must have been a completely different world when you must have started with like 14,000 internet accounts, which is such a different world, and today is a completely unimaginable world that we are in. Kind of taking a cue from that further, you scaled many businesses, and in your personal opinion, what are the 2-3 key important things that one has to keep in mind while scaling businesses in India, right? I mean, it's a very different world. While there are a lot of technology kind of started in Silicon Valley, but India is a completely different ecosystem. So I'm sure there are some local nuances that you can talk about maybe.
So look, most companies start small, right? Now, if you are a category creator, which means market does not exist, you're a pioneer innovator. Mm-hmm. So online job search did not exist in India when you started, right? We had to create the category. Yeah. Restaurant listing sites did not exist in India. Zomato created a category. Shopping comparison, insurance shopping comparison did not exist in India. Policybazaar had to create a category. So there are companies that are category creators. And if you look at those companies, right, you start small, you figure things out. Most importantly, you understand the consumer well. Yeah. If you understand the consumer well, you will find out the unsatisfied needs, the unsolved problems, and you will address those. If you address those, you're creating a market where the customer will buy, right? And if you're able to do that, then you've got a good start. Then it's about how large is the potential market and how well do you execute.
Yeah.
Right. So the market for food delivery was, say, X, because people would call up restaurants and the local restaurant would deliver home. Mm-hmm. And there was one delivery company called Domino's, which delivered pizzas at home and was doing very, very well. But only pizzas, only its own pizzas. Mm-hmm. So it was a pizza company, not a delivery company. Right. It delivered the pizza, their own pizzas. Right. Taking a cue from there, when Swiggy and Zomato, and Swiggy did it first, we must acknowledge that, decided to get into food delivery, and there is network of riders in a city and restaurants to supply. Swiggy and Zomato, the aggregators, would get a commission, right? Initially, right, the response was interesting. It wasn't giant. Mm-hmm. But over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, it has become a giant market. A new category has been created. Now, to do all this, what do you need? You need a great management team. You need a great team. You need technology, right? Without a great team, you can't do it. So there must be a large market, a potentially large market. Agar market hi nahi, to scale kahan se aayega?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Second is you've got to have the chops to service that market, the capabilities. And if you have that, then you can do things. So, but at its heart, once you know you're addressing a potentially large market, scaling up is about letting go to the right people as an entrepreneur. You get a good team and you empower and delegate, you're all right.
And I think you touched upon some of these. My next question was going to be about, what is it that you did differently to kind of stay relevant for such a long time, and you continue to your business continues to thrive in even after so many decades. So a couple of things you mentioned. Any other nuances that you think you can, specifically like on the execution side, right?
I'll tell you. See, when we launched Naukri, we did it with just 2 people, 3 people, right? Maybe 4 people, right? And we would simply take jobs from all the newspapers in the country, 29 of them, and put them up on our site.
Interesting.
So we did that first. When we did that, traffic began to come because people wanted to see jobs. And here were all the jobs for the last 30 days in one place.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you are in Delhi, but the job came out as Hindu in Chennai, you could find it here.
Interesting.
If the job came out 15 days ago and you missed it, you can find it here. So it was a very useful resource for people looking for jobs or interested in looking for jobs, right? Management people, right? Mid-career. And traffic began to come. The moment traffic began to come, people began to apply for those jobs. And in the communication, they would say, I saw your job on Naukri. So the HR manager who never advertised on Naukri, he advertised in the paper, began to hear about Naukri.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
When that happened, people began to approach us saying, listen, I've got some jobs I've not advertised in the paper because I only advertise maybe 10% of my job in the paper because paper is expensive. Otherwise, I do it through headhunters, old better file, employee referral, all of that. If I send you those jobs, will you put them up? And we began to charge for that. So some small money came in. Then we began to send letters to all HR managers every month saying, this is Naukri, this is the internet, this is what we do, here's the job format, this is how much it costs. And more money began to come. So we began to break even. Right? Then we raised venture capital. We're still a small company. We're doing 3 lakhs a month when we raise venture capital. And then we said, hey, we've been selling by direct mail, basically sending out letters. Why don't we hire a salesperson? So we hired 4 salespeople in Delhi, said, go out and sell, meet companies.
Mm-hmm.
And we discovered that the average salesperson within 3 months was selling 50,000 rupees worth of listings. And his total cost was 22,000 rupees. And this 50,000 going up every month. So he was profitable in his own total cost.
Right.
So we said, hey, this is cool. Let's add more and more salespeople. Mm-hmm. And over the next 2 years, we had added 240 salespeople across 11 cities, and we had scaled. So what I say is that in order to scale profitably, a company needs to find its repeatable, profitable unit.
Right.
And we had found a repeatable, profitable unit, which is our salesperson.
Interesting.
So once you find your repeatable, profitable unit, keep on repeating and keep on and ensure with every repetition the unit is profitable, and you will scale with profit.
And how do you tackle challenges that come your way, right? So as over a period of time, there may have been fundamental shifts in which, let's say, platforms like I don't know how you look at LinkedIn, for example, or those platforms. Like, how do you sort of change your business model to kind of tackle those scenarios?
So we have not changed our business model. So look, we studied LinkedIn very carefully. And we came to the conclusion that LinkedIn and Naukri will coexist.
Mm-hmm.
The reason being that we are very good at solving one problem, which they're not so good at.
Mm-hmm.
They are very good at solving another problem, which we are not so good at. Right? So if you want 300 Java programmers this quarter, you won't go to LinkedIn. You'll come to Naukri.
Mm.
But if you want that one technical architect, of which there are 346 in India only, that one specific niche skill,
mm-hmm.
Of which 14 are on Naukri, but 76 are on LinkedIn, right? You may go to LinkedIn first, right? So I think we found our sweet spot, and I think they have found theirs.
Got it. Great. Taking a slightly different tangent in your journey, you have also been involved, like you mentioned, Zomato and Policy Bazaar and a few other startups that you spotted them before anyone else, and you actually invested in them. So were there any particular qualities in these founders that you saw that got you excited? Like, how did you decide to sort of put faith and trust in them?
So look, there are 2 very important things. One is the quality of the idea or business. The second is quality of team, right? So when I say quality of idea or business, we look for evidence of natural traction or such a compelling value prop that we know it'll work, right? So if the startup is solving an unsolved problem, it should be getting traction without advertising, which means लोग आ रहे हैं, इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, खुश हैं, थोड़ा पैसा शायद कोई दे रहा है, right? And then, on that foundation, you can invest money and say, now scale it, right? So in the case of Zomato, the site was getting traffic. It had no money. It wasn't advertising. It was getting 1 lakh rupee a month of revenue, and they were somehow managing, working out of home, right? But the great thing about Zomato was that it was the only website that had all the menu cards. And I personally found that very useful and interesting, right? So when I met Deepinder Goyal for the first time, I asked him, boss, ye idea kahan se aaya? Where did you get this idea from? And he said, look, I was working in Bain Consulting, and it was in Gurgaon after finishing from IIT. And it was an office where there were maybe 55 people, 50 people, 60 people, something like that. Mostly young, mostly male, mostly living away from home, mostly single, which meant that they would not get food from home. Office hours were long, working hours were long. You ended up having invariably lunch and dinner in the office.
Yeah.
Office had a cafeteria that would not serve food, but you could bring your own food and eat it there. To make life easy for the team, the admin folks had collated all the delivery menu cards of all the 70 or 80 restaurants that delivered to that location and put them in a file in the cafeteria. And Deepinder said, at 1 o'clock, there's a long line to access that file. Then you get it for 2.5 minutes. Then you quickly decide and you phone up and you place the order. And then you come back after 1 hour and the food is delivered. So it's a huge pain.
Right.
So he came in one Saturday and scanned all those menus and put them up on his personal page on the office intranet. And he said, within 3 days, the IT infra guy in office came to me and said that, what have you done? Why is 95% of the internal traffic going to your page? And he said the penny dropped. And I figured that aggregation of menu cards has got value.
Right.
And so I went on weekends and picked up menu cards from all restaurants around Delhi NCR. And when I had 800 of them, I launched the site. And immediately traffic began to come. He had built a traffic magnet.
Right.
And that is something which told me he got a customer signal. He got a customer insight. The customer had told him that we want menu card aggregation. He just did it and it worked. So the market gives you a signal. The customer gives you a signal. Can you read it?
There is a slight similarity between the way the supply side was solved by you versus and what Deepinder did, I think. This platform is also for folks who will be joining us from across different parts of the world. So are there any nuances that you have observed in, say, successful Indian entrepreneurs and, especially tech entrepreneurs versus, let's say, folks sitting out of Silicon Valley? And are there any sort of insights you want to share over there?
Well, look, if money is getting tight, which, from the Fed's announcements and actions, it well might be, which means you've got to do more with less. You've got to be slightly more frugal, perhaps, than you were 2 years ago. Then you've got to focus a lot on unit economics, customer money, and revenue and cash flow, operating cash flow, as opposed to earlier when you could get a lot of money to fund what you want to do and look at revenue only 3 years later or 4 years later, right? Which means that you've got to have a sharper focus on the consumer in India. And let's face it, the consumer in India is price conscious. If you want to build a mass product, right, you've got to be priced reasonably in India, because the market for expensive stuff in India or premium goods is only so much, which very often means that you've got to find unique solutions to India at price points that would be lower than in the developed world. right? Take a look at what e-commerce has done, or even the food delivery company have done on cash on delivery. Cash on delivery is not a Western concept.
Right.
It doesn't exist in the US, in the Valley. Everything is electronic, everything is by card.
Yeah.
But e-commerce companies, food delivery companies still do 60, 70%, sometimes 80% of their business on cash on delivery, right? That is a fairly unique thing for India, that you send the stuff, the guy who delivers gets notes, cash. You have to hold a reverse supply chain back of handling the cash and then receiving the money at your end. At the same time, what cash on delivery does is that it gives the customer the opportunity to say, I've changed my mind. Take it back. I won't pay you the money. And you have no choice but to take it back. That imposes extra costs on you. Because what you thought was a sale is not a sale. You got to pay for it, getting the product back. In many cases, you can't use that product again, or resell it. You have to sell it as seconds. So you lose even more money. So your economics have to be such that you take care of that, right? 67% of India's population is not urban.
Yeah.
But they're getting online. They may or may not know English. India has 26 languages, right? How do you cater to these populations? And the product or the offering that's relevant to them may not be relevant to what's relevant for the person in big cities. The logistics, if you're sending product, are different for rural India, perhaps more expensive. You still got to make money. So these are uniquely Indian challenges, and depending on what vertical you're addressing.
Got it. Interesting. Thanks for that. One more, a bit of like, future looking, crystal ball gazing kind of a question is like, what makes you bullish about the Indian market overall? And then are there any particular spaces which you think are going to be really stand out of outperformers?
So look, I think a couple of things. A large young population, which is aspirational and wants to upwardly mobile.
Yeah.
That's one big thing. The second big thing is that the fundamental economic growth in India. We may have had blips. We may not be China, but the Indian economy is growing. So growth, large young population, aspirational. I think these two fundamental things will drive India. In addition, there is a legal system, no matter how not so well it may be running right now. There is democracy. Imperfect, perhaps, but it is there. And these two things will endure and make sure India lasts a long time. Right? So large population, economic growth, democracy, rule of law. Okay? And that's what makes me optimistic about India. In terms of sectors, look, we don't do it top down. We look at companies bottom up. There was no sector called food delivery. There was no sector called restaurant listings until Zomato made it happen.
Right.
There was no sector called insurance aggregation until Policybazaar made it happen. What sectors are bullish about? We're not bullish on sectors. We're bullish on companies.
Interesting.
If somebody's doing good stuff, back it. Sector ban jayega.
That's such an interesting thing. Yeah. Any role that you think, this obviously with UPI and, digital payments becoming all pervasive and increasing month on month, we see new records being set on that. How have you seen that as it's a pretty phenomenal thing unique to India as well. How do you see that as another growth driver?
So I think that's a huge enabler. I think what the government did in UPI is truly remarkable. I think what the government has done in Jan Dhan accounts is truly remarkable. And I think what the government is trying to do in the healthcare stack, hopefully will work as well as UPI. And if it does, these are transformational. Whole new categories, industries, companies have come up and are doing business because of UPI, right? Suddenly, the ease of making payments, receiving payments has gone up manifold. And what that does is increase velocity. And anything that increases velocity is good for business and growth. It reduces friction in the system.
Right. And it unlocks a new value, which, a lot of businesses were not looking at internet as a source of subscription revenue or any of those things, right? I think just the ease of transactions just kind of enable all of that as well. Just a parting sort of question, we as TimesBridge are, working with a bunch of global companies, helping them sort of enter India, and that's our sort of core business. And we have a lot of our future partners who are talking to us and interested in entering and taking advantage of the Indian market opportunity. If you were to give like 2-3, big picture advice to them, like if before or while they are entering into India, what would that be?
So I think India will exceed its market potential in the long run, but it may not meet your expectations in the short run, because India takes a little time to get used to as to how to do business, what business to do, right? And we've seen that in company after company has entered India. Mm-hmm. Because a 1.3 billion population is very large and therefore looks very attractive. But to actually make sales and the market happen, it takes a little time, because you've got to understand the consumer, you've got to understand the landscape, and come out with the right solutions.
Awesome. No, that's a super, super interesting insight. And before you, Dara was speaking at this event as well. And, he's seen the journey of how Uber has taken its bit of time, but then now it is pretty well established in India and they are kind of reaping benefits. So, and a lot of our partners have kind of gone through that sort of curve. So yeah, that's a super insightful industry. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sanjeev, for being part of the i3 Summit. It was a pleasure having you over here. And it was great to hear all the insights that you shared with us today. From your journey, and I'm sure a lot of our current and future global partners are going to benefit from the insights that you shared today. So thank you so much, Sanjeev.
Thank you.
Pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure talking to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
It was great to hear an India perspective from an esteemed business leader like Sanjeev Bikhchandani. Some of the points he raised, including India's fundamental growth drivers, echoed what we heard from Dara as well. These are all the reasons why, as we heard earlier, it's important to play the long game in India. Digital innovations in the country, including digital payments, could propel India to, as Sanjeev said, exceed its market potential in the long run. For our third and last fireside chat, Insights in India, our speaker is someone who will share insights on running an Indian business, one that's been extremely successful in India's digital transformation and has also witnessed TimesBridge's growth in close quarters. Our final speaker of the day is Satyan Gajwani, Vice Chairman of Times Internet, the digital arm of the Times Group, and he will be in conversation with Nayantara Rai, Senior Editor, ET Now.
Hello and welcome to i3, TimesBridge annual summit, which has been conceived as a platform where business leaders from India and around the world can converge to talk about one of the most exciting business opportunities that's out there on this planet, the Indian market. I am going to be in conversation with Satyan Gajwani, the Vice Chairman of Times Internet Limited, who's joining us here. Satyan, thank you so much for your time. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you, Nayantara. Nice to speak to you as well.
Now, Times Internet, 20 years old, but look at the story, how diversified it's become from, news to music, to entertainment, to sports, to even the real estate market. You've covered the whole gambit. I think what a lot of the audience will want to know is how you did it. So let's set the context for that. You could have easily picked up, old legacy brands from the Times Group and done a copy-paste model, but you didn't do that.
Yeah, we're quite a weird company. There's not very many like us in the world. In that, I think we're one of the few companies that's been successful in building a large, competitive, relevant digital presence while being part of a very large and storied, established, business group. We've gone through, I would say, 3 different lives in the last 20 years. But I think in the last 5-10 years, the major thing that's really helped us be successful was reshaping our DNA to be more of a product and technology oriented company, more than a media company. And so, my background, I was a math and computer science major in college. I didn't really have much of a media background before I joined. And so, when I came into the business, my priority was really centered on how do we make products that people really love? Because so much, particularly coming from a media heritage, is centered on content and brand and marketing. We took a very conscious call as a company to say, let's prioritize product and technology above everything else and make sure we have the best consumer experience we can build. Today, that has led us into a lot of different directions, well beyond traditional media and, well beyond news, which is obviously the heritage of us as a group. We say our mission is to inform, entertain, and enable the Indian consumer. And so that's led us into a wide variety of directions. I think the places we've been the most successful have really been in the intersection of media and technology. I think, I would say we're probably better than the average media company when it comes to product and technology. And we're probably better at media and content and consumer than the average technology company. And so that's sort of been the sweet spot where we've been able to be successful.
If you look at Times Internet now, the digital platform, it's bigger than even Facebook. It's now, third largest in the country after Facebook as well as Google. You've talked about the confluence of media and technology, but can I ask you, Satyan, in this era of disruption, how are you going to ensure that you continue this edge and maybe close the gap with the other global giants?
Every reasonably good entrepreneur has to have a healthy sense of paranoia. And so do we, in terms of wondering, what will be our existential threat in the next 5 or 10 years? Fortunately, the way we're built, we've built a lot of different sort of tentpole assets. So we have, I think, over 6 businesses that have over 100 million monthly users. Across all of our businesses, we reach about 600 million monthly users, and we reach about 150 million of them every day. So that kind of reach across a variety of assets is very powerful, and it's very hard for people to disrupt. And so even if, say, one segment of ours is under competition or some competitive pressure, we're really quite a resilient ecosystem that way. That being said, I don't think there's an ecosystem in the world that's as dynamic and evolving as India. And the intensity of competitive pressure is growing exponentially. And it forces us to constantly think about what are the things we need to do to remain competitive, to continue to grow, to think about where is our next avenues of potential expansion, if that's what it is, but really how to continue to be the most relevant company we can.
And when we talk about staying relevant, staying ahead of the curve, and of course, growing exponentially the way we've seen at Times Internet, are your competitors mostly global, domestic, or is that just the way we look at it? Because a competitor is a competitor.
Well, it's both. And I think that's probably the most interesting thing about the Indian market, right? If you say the 3 largest consumer markets in the world, it's probably the US, China, and India today. The US is very clearly, by and large, dominated by American companies. China is very clearly dominated by Chinese companies. And India is this very interesting place where there's a pretty healthy tension between global companies trying to grow and establish footprints in the country and domestic companies trying to build a presence. We play a kind of interesting role because we honestly straddle both sides. We own and operate 15 or 20 different assets across a variety of segments like news and sports and entertainment and real estate and personal finance, et cetera. But we've also partnered with some of the best companies in the world to help them in their expansions into India, like Uber and Coursera and Airbnb and a number of others as well. The way we think about it is that every market segment is unique and different. And some of them are really well suited for a domestic player. Some of them are probably better suited for global best-in-class companies to naturally expand. And some are in the gray area in between. I know we have a few segments where we compete pretty competitively with domestic players and international players. At the end of the day, like you said, it doesn't really matter where the person's starting or where the company's operating from. What really matters is who provides the best customer experience and, who wins the hearts of the customer.
And is this what was recently exhibited with what we saw to be a really large deal between Times Internet as well as ShareChat, where Times Internet, kind of exited by picking up stock in ShareChat, but MX Takatak had become really large. So is that one way of looking at it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very unique space because all three of those markets were relevant, right? So it started because a Chinese company was kicked out of the market, which created an opening both for American and Indian companies to compete. In the Indian competitive segment, there were 3 or 4 of us competing. Our view was that it was the best shot of success would be to consolidate the number 1 and the number 2 players and really establish a clear market leader, and then spend more energy focusing on how do we expand the market and do more in the short video space, which we think is an incredibly valuable and interesting media segment, rather than fighting for share amongst multiple players. And so we kind of took the initiative on that and merged with ShareChat. Today, Moj and MX Tuck are the clear market leader in short form video, and there's a very, very strong team there that we have a lot of confidence in, and we believe Ankush and them will be able to really build something powerful. And ultimately, that's what we're here for.
It's the war to win 14 seconds of airwaves, isn't it? That's the new phenomenon that we're seeing.
No one's going to watch this interview because it's more than 15 seconds long and nobody has the attention for it anymore. So,
okay. On a more serious note, and another brand that you guys have created, and one of the businesses that you've created, which has scaled up so fast and done so phenomenally well, is MX Player. It hit 1 billion in downloads on the Google Play Store. That was done. I think a lot of our audience members will want to know about this. What went behind MX Player and then scaling it up to large, and the competition, of course, that you face from whether it's Netflix to a Prime Video to a Hotstar.
We have a habit of finding very competitive segments and wanting to jump into them. So whether that's good or bad, but it's probably one of the most ambitious bets we took. About 4 years ago, everyone knew that online video would be important. We obviously had a strong view on it. And at that time, if you recall, every single content creator, whether it was a production house, a TV company, a movie studio, said, we're going to be the Netflix of India. Everyone launched their own app, put out a bunch of shows on it and said, okay, now what? Again, I think this is where we as a company who really has a strong native DNA in technology really benefited, in that we understood that it's easy to build an app. It's also honestly sometimes easy to make a couple good shows, but it's really hard to build large and sustained distribution. And so we found a very different strategy in that we bought a company called MX Player, which was a local video playback utility app which people use to play video files on their phone. But we knew how big and pervasive the app was, especially when you went into tier 2, tier 3 India, where people would sideload content onto their phone, and that was the most natural way of consuming media. And so we said, what if we bought this product and then built the best streaming product you could inside of it? And so it was a weird idea. We bought something to turn it into something else. We're fortunate; it's been very successful. We now have over 1 billion downloads, hundreds of millions of monthly users. When we put out our flagship shows, they're probably the most watched shows in India with billions of minutes of consumption across them. Again, very competitive segment with global competitors, primarily with Netflix, Amazon, Hotstar, et cetera. But our strategy is very differentiated, very India specific, really oriented towards our understanding of the customer and the market here. And, we're very optimistic about where it's going to go.
The benefit of our audience members as well. Anybody who wants to do business in India wants to make money, right? Now, the Indian consumer is also considered to be very, very price conscious, is suddenly gotten used to a whole bunch of freebies. We can thank the US Fed and the bazooka after bazooka that has been unleashed, but that era is coming to a close. For all of those that are tuning in, you've had to go through it all, right? Advertising money that only wants to maybe go for cricket or Bollywood, and how to get that on Times Internet. Any experiences that you want to share with us, especially at a time when we're talking so much about subscription versus advertising?
Yep. No, I mean, it's a great question. India generally has been more of an ad-led market for media. In traditional media, there were viable models around that. In digital media, given how much share Google and Facebook take, it's also been more challenging, I think, for new companies to build out there. That being said, a lot of this is changing very quickly, particularly given how companies like ours are expanding in tier 2, tier 3 India and reaching new audiences. We've actually seen very strong advertiser uptake for some of our new products. So that's been a great blessing, and we're very optimistic about where that'll go. At the same time, it's funny because we all definitely think of India as a very price sensitive market, free oriented market. And yet in the last 3 to 5 years, I think the readiness and willingness to pay for video content certainly has expanded exponentially. we think that the way to actually see successful growth on having customers pay for things is to be very customer friendly. And so for us, that means a few different things. One is really enabling all sorts of different price points and packs. So a day pack, a week pack, a month pack, a year pack, depending on what suits the right audience. Other things we found to be successful is just, for example, Indians are very hesitant to embrace recurring billing because there's a fear that they'll get charged for something they don't want. That's less of an issue in markets like the US, but there's a lot of these dynamics that as you understand better on the ground, you can reshape your pricing strategies and your product strategies around. Ultimately, you have to be a trustworthy product for the customer. And I think if you're delivering value and you're a trustworthy offering, I think propensity to spend is growing, and it's growing quite quickly, actually.
So then how should one look at it with the larger theme that's playing out in India and worldwide, which is democratization of content and this whole thing of creator economy?
Yeah. Well, that's a separate question, which is what you're producing worth paying for, which is a totally separate question. And I think the biggest challenge that every established traditional media company, whether it's in entertainment, news, whatever it may be, is, are you still providing the same value that you did 10 or 20 years ago? If you're in the entertainment space, you're not necessarily a movie studio competing with another movie studio. You're competing with any and every creator out there that has a passion for entertaining people. And that might be someone making a 10-minute video on YouTube. It might be someone making a 15-second video on Tuck. But ultimately, in an attention economy, this is a real challenge that's dynamic. I think, one of the most interesting trends that we're thinking about is that you have this exponential explosion in the quantity of content that's being produced today. But then there's also debates around quality and trustworthiness. So quality probably more so in the entertainment world, trustworthiness probably more so in the news world. And so, there can be a million people who want to create news, but who do you trust? And there could be a million people who want to create content, and who do you feel closer or most attached to? What's interesting, I think, is that in the news space, heritage and brand value matters probably more. In entertainment, whether you're a storied movie studio that's been producing hit movies for 30 years or you're an A-list Bollywood actor, if I'm more attuned to and feel culturally connected with that random creator, in a small town in India, that's all that really matters. And so I think in the entertainment world, it's a really interesting trend in that there's going to be this shift of attention and value and fandom from the five big Bollywood actors and actresses towards thousands of regional and non-regional celebrities or mini celebrities that form on social media and digital media.
So then tell us, if Mukesh Ambani, India's richest man, can say data is the new oil, which was just before, the entire Reliance Jio explosion, the explosion of smartphones and data that we've seen back home in India, which has made it the third largest market after US and China. What exactly are Times Internet's plans?
Well, we're not building the biggest, one of the biggest telecom networks from zero. So, slightly more modest than Mr. Ambani, but at the same time, we have a very unique position, right? There's no media company like us. There's actually no technology company like us. I think we've been very successful in the last 5-10 years in terms of building very strong tentpole media assets. So we have the dominant assets in news, sports, music, premium video, a couple other strong media segments. And across those, we now reach more than 50% of the country on a monthly basis. So the question that we're really focusing on now is, okay, what do we do with this audience? Because we've created a media offering, people engage with the things we offer, but is there a way for us to do more? And so a lot of our focus today is, alongside obviously building really powerful and relevant media experiences, what are the ways in which we can enable customers? So if our mission is inform, entertain, and enable the customer, we feel like there's enormous scope for helping customers do things better. That might be helping them make better decisions on their personal finances. It might be helping them find a home. It might be something around education. But we feel like there's a lot of enablement oriented services that we can provide, and particularly in a market like India, where it's hard to always trust everything that's offered to you. Advisory or support on doing things from a trusted party matters. And I think that's where we can play a really powerful role.
So then taking that forward, we've been around for 20 years via Times Internet, but for all of the audience members who might already be doing business in India or looking to enter and start doing business in India, what are some of the big trends that you're watching out for? You already told us Indians are not very fond of recurring payments. What else? What are the striking trends that they need to keep in mind?
Yeah, so I think there's corporate strategy trends, and then there's how to succeed in India trends. From a strategy trends, I think, India is probably the real. There's so much narrative about what digital could do around the world, and in markets like the U.S., I think what people are starting to realize today is that digital assets are really just shifting behavior from traditional companies to digital companies. Like you used to go stay at a Marriott, now you might stay at an Airbnb. But really, it's not opening up as much as maybe people thought it would. I think in India, there's a big difference in that digital connectivity really opens up 2 or 3 new things. One is a completely new customer set, because there's a set of people who just weren't connected to a lot of services and media services that were available before that are now there. And 2 is, you can offer things at cost structures that are so much more materially lower than what traditional companies do, that you can create offerings at price points that weren't possible before. And I do think in a price sensitive market like India, your ability to really expand markets by playing with price points or doing things different is a really powerful difference. And I think that's something that it's probably the most interesting trend, is just how does digital inclusion and financial inclusion alongside, drastically lower price points, how does it change consumption behavior? And I think that trend was always the theory of digital globally. It's probably more true in India than it is in any other market in the world.
Then what would your advice be for all the entrepreneurs who are tuning in, who are part of the audience that want to do business in India? You've succeeded, right? So what would your advice be for that?
So I don't know if I can say we've succeeded. We're competing just like everyone else is, and we've still got a long ways ahead of us. But
First is to be modest.
If you say like entrepreneurship is like dog years and we've been around for 20 years, we're like hundreds of years old. So yeah, in that sense, we have more experience in this domain than many do. On one hand, we just talked about how promising India is as a market. The flip of that is that India is so much of a future potential oriented market. And the ability for these companies, including us and others, to sort of get caught up in the hype is a dangerous thing. And so you have to, I think one of the biggest challenges of being an entrepreneur in India is you have to be able to both have your head in the clouds and your feet on the ground, because you can easily envision how 500 million people could be using your product in 5 to 10 years. And it wouldn't be fake to say that. And yet at the same time, you have to know that today you are scrapping for that next dollar. And no matter which venture capitalist or private equity fund is ready to throw tens or hundreds of millions of dollars behind you, the reality of your economics today, or the reality of your business today, is definitely much smaller than your potential in the future. And you need to be able to balance both. And I think that's probably the most important thing. Second, I would say is that what we've seen, particularly as companies get bigger, is that the biggest challenge is team building. And thinking about how to institutionalize your company, how to build an incredible second line, how to make yourself more redundant in the operating style and culture of the company, rather than sort of being the dictator of the company. Because to really scale up, that's critical. Yeah, I think those are probably the 2 biggest things, is be able to sort of envision the future while being in the present, and think about how to build something bigger than yourself.
So how are you envisioning that, as Omicron seems to be behind us, hopefully no more COVID waves and the endemic is here, as there is fatigue when it comes to the screen, whether it's revenge travel, revenge dining, kids want to go back to school. How do you see this digital ecosystem play out for the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I think media consumption, I think, was moving to digital with or without COVID. I think, the ability to access everything on your phone is just an incredible opportunity. So I don't think that's changing. I think there's a number of places where digital experiences were convenient substitutes for traditional ones. And so they were saviors in a COVID world, but they weren't necessarily the best offerings. And so, it's great to be able to order food to your house, but it's also great to be able to go to a restaurant. And so you'll see the sort of the lashback, the revenge consumption, as you talked about. look, I think ultimately every consumer product is about making your life better in some way or another. And so, even there are great digital products that can help enable great offline experiences. And there are great digital products that will enable great online experiences. And there's going to be a space and a market for all of these. Particularly in India, where, we can think about going out to restaurants and whatnot, living in Bombay, Delhi, et cetera, Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, or whatever. But particularly for tier 2, tier 3 India, that really has the world at its fingertips because of their phone. That's not changing whether COVID is there or isn't there. That their ability to access, whether it's commerce and goods from anywhere in the world or anywhere on the country, at least, whether it's to access educational content or video content or, whatever it may be, that accessibility doesn't change with or without COVID. And I think it's very hard to turn back that switch or turn back that clock in some sense.
So it'll be the way it is right now, but only more digital, will be more attached and addicted to the screen. Is that how it's going to be?
Well, look, the phrase that we use and that I really love is enablement, right? So we inform, entertain, and enable people. We don't want to assume your life. We want to support your life. And I think the best digital experiences are ones that support the life you want to lead. And so if you want to build, eventually your own sort of second life avatar in a virtual reality world, digital will certainly enable that. And if you want an experience that helps you find the best places to go out for an interesting show or a meal, digital will support that as well. Or if you're looking for the right home to buy, or you're looking for the right mutual fund to buy, hopefully digital experiences will help you make those decisions better and enable you with better decisions, better information, faster and easier. I think both will exist. I think there'll be people who live in a very virtual world, people who live in a very physical world, and digital will permeate both of their lives. And frankly, I think all of us will have it in different components of our lives. There'll be parts of us that are very virtual, parts of us that are very physical. But I do think digital will enable all of it.
Okay. So with that, Satyan, I
don't know if that was a cop-out answer or if that was a real answer for you, but
no, I got it. And I'm guessing the winner is going to be one who's not only going to enable it, but maybe even have models for the real world, the metaverse, and of course, the digital world. Okay. With that, Satyan, I'd like to thank you for being a part of the inaugural session for i3. This is, of course, TimesBridge Annual Summit, where business leaders, thought leaders get together, ideate, share their learnings for doing business in one of the most exciting markets in the world, which is India.
Thank you, Nayantara. Thank you for having me.
After listening to our three speakers, all of whom run companies that have been extremely successful in India, it's clear that there are several learnings that companies must keep in mind when doing business or thinking about doing business in the Indian market. From Dara, we learned that global companies operating in India must bear in mind that delivering a product or a service in India is a huge opportunity, but it also comes with the responsibility to make sure that it's delivered in the right way. From Sanjeev, we heard more about the growth drivers that are helping create such an appealing opportunity in the Indian market, from a large, young, aspirational population and the ease of digital payments to the growth in the Indian economy. And from Satyan, the ways in which digital connectivity has fundamentally transformed what companies can offer and which customers they can serve. For Times Internet, it's opened up a new customer set and allowed them to create offerings at price points that were not possible before. And perhaps our most powerful reminder was to envision the future while being rooted in the present. With that, we are pleased to leave you hopefully with several new perspectives on how business leaders think through their experiences of growing brands in India. With all of its challenges and complexity, India truly offers an opportunity like no other. And with that, it's time to say thank you for joining us at TimesBridge's first annual i3 Summit.